In a modest apartment tucked away on the outskirts of the city, Marcus stood before a canvas, paintbrush in hand, staring at the splashes of vibrant colors. The walls around him were lined with works that reflected his life, his struggles, and his dreams. Each piece was a story, a journey captured in hues of red, blue, and gold. Yet, despite the talent that poured into every brushstroke, Marcus had not yet found the recognition he deserved. His work was a blend of abstract expressionism and rich cultural storytelling, infused with elements of his heritage and life as a black man in a world that often overlooked his kind. He painted stories of his ancestors, the history of his people, and the stories that lived within his soul. Each piece was his rebellion against a world that told him his worth was defined by his skin color and not the depth of his mind. But as he stood in his cramped studio apartment, those thoughts were clouded by the bitter sting of rejection. Despite his undeniable talent, the art world had been cruel to him. He had spent months sending his portfolio to galleries, attending exhibition openings, and networking in an effort to make a name for himself. Yet, each time he was told that his work was too edgy, not refined enough, or that it simply didn't fit their market. The labels were always the same, and they were always tied to his identity. His phone buzzed on the table, interrupting his thoughts. It was another rejection email. He opened it, scanning the words quickly, as he had done countless times before. The email was polite but impersonal, offering vague reasons for why they wouldn't be showcasing his work. Marcus sighed and set the phone down. It was the same cycle, over and over again. Rejection, disappointment, and an unyielding desire to keep going, despite everything. He looked around the room at the paintings that filled every corner. Each piece was a window into a world only he could see, a world he wanted to share with others, to show the beauty and complexity of his experience. But the world, or at least the art world, wasn't ready for it. Or so it seemed. There was one gallery in particular that had caught his eye. The Andover Gallery, a prestigious establishment known for showcasing both contemporary and classic works. The gallery had a reputation for discovering emerging artists and catapulting them into the spotlight. The owners were well connected, and getting into their collection could be the break Marcus needed. But that meant facing the very same kind of elitism and prejudice that had been a barrier to him throughout his career. On a particularly low day, Marcus found himself staring at his phone, scrolling through the gallery's website. The owners were known for their discerning taste, and they rarely accepted unknown artists. The idea of even approaching them felt intimidating. But something inside him sparked. He couldn't keep waiting for validation from people who didn't understand him. He had to make his own opportunities. The next morning, he dressed in his best clothes, an old suit that still fit, though it wasn't quite as sharp as it once was, and walked to the Andover Gallery. As he approached the glass doors, his heart pounded. He had to be confident. He had to sell himself, not just his work. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment he entered, the sleek, minimalist interior of the gallery made him feel small. The walls were lined with white frames and abstract paintings, the kind that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a private collection. The space was pristine, quiet except for the hum of soft classical music playing in the background. His boots clicked against the marble floor as he made his way to the front desk, where a young woman sat, typing away on her computer. "Hello, I'd like to speak with the owner," Marcus said, his voice steady but nervous. The woman looked up, her eyes scanning him for a moment before she smiled politely. "Do you have an appointment?" Marcus hesitated. He didn't. He had no appointment, no prior connection to the gallery. Just his work, and a hope that they might see something worth investing in. But he couldn't back down now. "No, I don't," he admitted, but added quickly, "but I'm an artist, and I think you should take a look at my portfolio. I'm confident my work could be a good fit for your gallery." The woman raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem dismissive. "I can let Mr. Andover know you're here, but he's a busy man. I can't promise he'll have time to meet with you." Marcus nodded, understanding the situation. He couldn't expect anything more. She called in the owner, and within minutes, a man in his mid-50s approached, his dark suit sharp and tailored to perfection. He had a reputation for being a discerning critic, known for having a keen eye for art that was truly unique. "Mr. Andover, this is..." The woman looked at Marcus expectantly. "Marcus Blackwell," he said, shaking the gallery owner's hand firmly. "I'm an artist, and I'd love for you to take a look at my work." Mr. Andover's expression was polite but skeptical. He studied Marcus for a moment before speaking. "Well, Mr. Blackwell, I must admit that we don't usually take unsolicited portfolios. We have a very specific vision here at the gallery." "I understand," Marcus said, trying not to sound defeated. "But I believe my work is unique. It's more than just painting, it's a narrative. A story. And I think it could resonate with your audience." Mr. Andover glanced over his shoulder at the receptionist and then back at Marcus. "All right. Show me what you have." Marcus handed over a sleek portfolio, his heart racing. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Andover flipped through the pages slowly, pausing to look closely at certain pieces. There were abstract portraits, sweeping landscapes of his hometown, and intricate depictions of Black history and culture. Each piece had its own story, and Marcus was proud of the way they came together to tell the tale of resilience and beauty in the face of adversity. But the longer Mr. Andover looked, the less impressed he seemed. He paused at one of the bolder pieces, a painting of a black man standing tall in the face of a storm, lightning flashing in the background. Mr. Andover's lips pressed into a thin line, and he shifted uncomfortably. This is very intense," he said, his voice lacking enthusiasm. "I'm not sure it fits with what we usually represent here." Marcus swallowed hard but kept his composure. "I understand. But these pieces speak to my truth, and I believe that's what art should do, challenge perceptions, spark emotions." Mr. Andover glanced back at the receptionist, clearly uninterested. "Look, I can see you put effort into these, but they're just not what we're looking for at the moment. I'm afraid there's no space for them here." The rejection stung, but Marcus didn't show it. He stood tall and nodded. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Andover." As he left the gallery, the weight of another rejection pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had hoped this would be different, but it wasn't. He stepped back into the cold city streets, determined to keep pushing forward. His work might not have a place in Mr. Andover's gallery, but that didn't mean it didn't have value. He would find another way to make the world see his worth. As he walked away, he promised himself that this wouldn't be the last time he crossed paths with Mr. Andover. One day, things would be different. The days following his encounter with Mr. Andover at the gallery were a blur. Marcus poured himself into his work, but the sting of rejection lingered like an unwelcome shadow. It was not just the dismissal of his art that hurt, it was the way it had been dismissed so casually, as if his struggle, his culture, and his identity were not worthy of acknowledgement. In the grand scheme of things, he was just another artist, one more face among a sea of hopefuls, looking for a chance, and yet always falling short. Marcus couldn't shake the image of Mr. Andover's face as he glanced through his portfolio, barely giving it more than a passing look before dismissing it entirely. He had hoped that someone with such a reputation would understand, or at least appreciate, what his art was trying to convey. But all he had seen in the gallery owner's eyes was indifference. The mocking tone was subtle, but undeniable. Marcus had felt it in Mr. Andover's words, in his mannerisms. A glance here, a dismissive nod there. It wasn't just the rejection of his work, it was the rejection of him, of everything that shaped him as an artist. The world that he painted wasn't what Mr. Andover wanted to see. The gallery owner preferred pieces that were safe, that didn't challenge the status quo, that didn't force anyone to think too deeply about things they weren't ready to face. As the rejection weighed on him, Marcus knew he needed to get away from the studio, to clear his mind. The monotony of his small apartment was starting to close in on him, and he needed something to keep him from spiraling deeper into self-doubt. He decided to take a walk through the city, hoping the rhythm of the streets would help him think. The city's energy was alive, the hustle and bustle of people moving in every direction, the distant hum of traffic blending with the occasional shout of street vendors and the sounds of music drifting from nearby cafes. Yet, despite the world moving around him, Marcus felt like an outsider, watching from the edges. He wandered aimlessly through the streets, passing art shops and galleries, some of them small and obscure, others more prestigious, like the one he had just visited. As he passed one of the smaller shops, something caught his eye. A painting in the window, vibrant and bold, caught the light in a way that made it impossible to ignore. It was a piece that reminded him of his own work, raw and unapologetic, a reflection of the world outside. He stepped inside and was greeted by the gallery owner, a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp features and a keen eye for art. She smiled as he entered, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a tinge of hope rise in his chest. Maybe this place would be different, maybe this gallery would see the value in what he created. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone friendly but professional. Marcus hesitated before answering. "I'm an artist," he said quietly. "I was hoping you might be interested in some of my work." The gallery owner raised an eyebrow, but didn't dismiss him immediately. "Tell me about it." Marcus explained his vision, the stories behind his paintings, the struggles, the triumphs, the cultural history embedded in every brushstroke. He spoke about his upbringing, about the legacy of his ancestors, and how he poured his heart into his art. He told her how he had been trying to break into the art scene but was continually rejected, both for his style and his heritage. The woman listened intently, nodding along. She asked a few questions about his technique and his influences, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't truly hearing him. After a long silence, she spoke. "I appreciate your passion, but your work, it's a bit too much for our clientele," she said gently. "We specialize in more refined pieces, you know? The kind of art that appeals to a broader audience." The words stung more than he cared to admit. He had heard them before, time and time again. His art wasn't refined enough. It wasn't the kind of thing that would appeal to their rich, sophisticated audience. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't safe. It wasn't what the art world was ready for. "I see," Marcus said, his voice steady but heavy. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked out, his heart sinking once again. Another gallery, another rejection. But this time it felt worse. The indifference he had faced at the Andover Gallery had been harsh, but this? This was different. The woman had been kind, polite even, but her words still carried the same weight. She wasn't rejecting him, she was rejecting his truth, his experience. And for the first time, Marcus began to wonder if he would ever find a place in a world that refused to understand him. As he walked back to his apartment, his mind churned with frustration. Why was it so hard for the art world to see what he saw in his own work? Why was his voice not valued? His art wasn't just decoration, it was a statement. It was history. It was identity. But none of that mattered to the gatekeepers of the art world. They cared about what was trendy, what would make the most money, and what would appeal to the most people. They didn't care about the stories that needed to be told. When Marcus returned to his studio, he stood in front of his latest painting, a large canvas depicting a powerful figure rising from the ashes of oppression, their hands reaching toward the sky. It was a piece that had come to him in a moment of deep reflection, a symbol of resilience and strength. As he stared at the work, a thought crept into his mind: what if they're wrong? What if I'm not the one who needs their approval? He had spent so much time chasing validation, hoping that someone, anyone, would see the worth in his art. But maybe the truth was that he didn't need to seek approval from those who didn't understand him. Maybe he needed to find his own path, create his own opportunities. He had the talent. He had the drive. He had the vision. What he needed now was the courage to keep moving forward, even if it meant going against the grain. Marcus took a deep breath and grabbed his paintbrush. The world may not have been ready for his art, but he was done waiting for them to decide when it was his time. In the weeks following his rejection from both the Andover Gallery and the smaller art shop, Marcus spent his days in a quiet, determined solitude. He continued to work on his paintings, each stroke of the brush infused with a mix of frustration, passion, and an unwavering sense of purpose. But the constant rejection weighed heavily on him. The gallery owner's dismissal seemed to echo in his mind, every time he looked at a new canvas, every time he tried to push forward. However, deep down, Marcus knew that the art world was not the end-all be-all of his career. He had always understood that the value of his art wasn't defined by the elitist circles that controlled galleries and auction houses. It was something deeper, something that transcended the superficial judgments of critics. What he didn't know yet was just how much deeper that value ran. One evening, as he sat at his desk, scanning art-related news and catching up on trends, an email notification popped up on his laptop. It was from a name he didn't recognize, Carter Williams, an art collector and investor who specialized in rare and undiscovered talents. His heart skipped a beat. Was this spam? Was it some kind of marketing trick? He hesitated, but then opened the email. The message was brief, but its contents sent a chill down Marcus' spine. Subject: Potential opportunity for your art. Dear Mr. Blackwell, I hope this message finds you well. I've had the privilege of reviewing some of your recent works, and I must say, I'm thoroughly impressed with the depth and emotion you capture in your pieces. They speak to something far beyond simple aesthetics. They resonate with a profound cultural significance that is often missing from contemporary art. I represent a private consortium of collectors who are looking to invest in unique, high-value art that tells a story. Your work fits that description perfectly. If you're open to a discussion, I would be happy to meet with you to talk about potential opportunities for showcasing and selling your art to our network. Best regards, Carter Williams. Marcus sat in stunned silence for a moment. His heart raced, and his mind spun with questions. How had this person found him? Was this real? It seemed almost too good to be true. But deep down, something told him this wasn't a hoax. His art had caught someone's eye, someone important, someone who appreciated the very essence of what he had been trying to convey all along. The next day, Marcus replied to the email, cautiously agreeing to meet with Carter Williams at a quiet cafe in the city. He was both excited and anxious. This could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for, or it could be another empty promise. But he had to take the chance. When he arrived at the cafe, he was greeted by a tall man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Carter Williams had a calm, confident demeanor, and he exuded an air of sophistication. He looked every bit the part of the art investor, but there was something else in his eyes, something that told Marcus this wasn't just a transaction. Carter Williams was genuinely interested in the story behind the art. They exchanged pleasantries, and then Carter got straight to the point. I've been following your work for some time now, he said, taking a sip of his coffee. Your paintings, they're unlike anything I've seen in a long while. They aren't just art, they're a statement. A reflection of your history, your identity, and your place in this world. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Marcus listened, his mind still reeling. What do you mean by what you're looking for? I'm not sure I understand. Carter smiled, sensing Marcus' confusion. What we're interested in is not just a pretty painting for someone's wall. We're looking for pieces that have intrinsic value, art that will appreciate over time because of its cultural significance, the story it tells. Your work fits that description perfectly. It's authentic, it's raw, and it speaks to a level of depth that many collectors and investors crave. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach. You're saying, my art could be worth something? Carter nodded. Absolutely. Your paintings, particularly the ones that explore your heritage and the cultural narratives they carry, are not just works of art. They're investments. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the pieces you've created are already worth millions, far beyond what the typical art gallery would ever recognize. Marcus' mind was racing. Worth millions? He had always poured his soul into his art, but never had he imagined it held that kind of value. He had been rejected by galleries for being too bold, too challenging, but here was someone who was seeing his art for what it truly was, valuable, important, and rare. Carter continued. We have a network of high-profile collectors who have been looking for pieces just like yours. Your work speaks to a generation that craves authenticity, and we want to ensure it reaches the right hands. That's why I'm here. I want to represent you and help you connect with the right buyers. Not just anyone, but the people who will appreciate and pay what your art is worth. Marcus' head was spinning, but this time it was with excitement, not doubt. So, you're saying I could sell my work for millions? Carter smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. Not just sell it. You'll be able to showcase it at auction houses, galleries, and private collections. Your art will be the centerpiece of high-profile exhibitions. You won't be begging for recognition anymore. You'll be the one people seek out. The weight of Carter's words sank in. Marcus had spent years struggling to break into a world that didn't want him. But here, in this moment, he realized something monumental. He didn't need the approval of the traditional art world. The value of his work wasn't determined by them. It was intrinsic, built into every brushstroke, every color choice, every story he told through his paintings. And now, someone else, someone who understood that value, was offering him a way to take his art to the world. You have my attention, Marcus said, his voice steady with newfound confidence. Let's make this happen. Carter's smile deepened. Good. Let's get started, Marcus. The world's ready for your art. As they shook hands, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time, he wasn't just an aspiring artist fighting for recognition. He was a creator, an investor in his own right, and soon, his work would be seen by the world in a way that would change everything. Weeks passed after Marcus' meeting with Carter Williams, and soon, his life began to transform in ways he had never imagined. The art world that had once seemed closed off and indifferent to his talents was now opening up to him in a flood of opportunity. His works were being featured in private collections, brought to the attention of top-tier art investors, and even presented at auctions that drew the eyes of art collectors worldwide. His phone buzzed constantly with new inquiries. Gallery owners who had previously dismissed his art now expressed interest in showcasing his pieces. Invitations to exclusive exhibitions arrived in the mail, and soon, his work was being recognized as not just relevant, but revolutionary. The art world was waking up to the fact that Marcus' paintings weren't just aesthetically pleasing, they were necessary. They told stories that were often overlooked, stories that were too important to remain in the shadows. But despite his newfound success, one thing still bothered Marcus. He couldn't shake the image of Mr. Andover, the gallery owner who had so callously rejected him. He hadn't forgotten the smug dismissal he had received at the Andover Gallery, nor the way Mr. Andover had looked at him as if his work was worthless. He had moved on since then, of course. He was no longer the struggling artist trying to break in. He was a sought-after talent with a growing reputation. Yet, something inside him wanted to make sure that Mr. Andover saw just how wrong he had been to dismiss Marcus and his work. One afternoon, Marcus received an invitation to an exclusive gala hosted by none other than Andover Gallery. It seemed the gallery was finally catching up to the times and wanted to showcase some of the cutting-edge artists they had previously overlooked. The invitation was a bit ironic, considering the way Mr. Andover had treated him, but Marcus knew this was an opportunity to confront the man who had doubted him. He decided to attend the gala, not out of spite, but because he had something to prove. Not just to Mr. Andover, but to the entire art world. His art wasn't about seeking approval, it was about telling a story that needed to be heard. The night of the gala arrived, and Marcus dressed in his finest suit, the one he had bought after his first big sale, feeling a sense of pride as he looked in the mirror. He was no longer the artist scrambling for recognition. Tonight, he would walk into that gallery as a successful, respected figure in the art world. He was ready to show them that he wasn't just an artist, he was a force to be reckoned with. When Marcus arrived at the Andover Gallery, he was greeted by a sea of well-dressed people, all admiring the elegant exhibits around them. Art collectors, investors, and fellow artists filled the space, chatting about the latest trends and the works on display. But Marcus' eyes were fixed on one person, Mr. Andover. The gallery owner was standing at the center of the room, conversing with a group of wealthy clients. His eyes flicked toward Marcus as he entered, but there was no recognition at first. The old man's face showed no sign of the regret Marcus had hoped to see. Instead, he continued his conversation as if nothing had changed. But Marcus wasn't here for an apology. He was here to show Mr. Andover that he had been wrong. Wrong to underestimate him. Wrong to assume that his art wasn't worthy. As the night went on, Marcus made his way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with other collectors and artists, but his mind was focused on the conversation that was bound to happen. Finally, after what felt like hours, he found himself face to face with Mr. Andover. Well, Mr. Andover said, his voice laced with mild surprise. If it isn't Marcus Blackwell. I didn't expect to see you here. Marcus didn't flinch. He smiled politely but with a knowing edge. I was invited, he said simply. The gallery owner raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Invited? That's unusual. Most artists don't get invited to our exclusive events. But I suppose things change. Marcus could see the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Mr. Andover's demeanor. The same man who had dismissed his work so flippantly was now facing the artist whose pieces were selling for millions at auctions. The reality of his oversight was starting to sink in, and Marcus could almost feel the weight of that realization pressing down on him. I trust your gallery is doing well? Marcus asked, leaning in slightly, his voice smooth and composed. Mr. Andover chuckled nervously. We're doing just fine. Always striving for excellence, of course. But the market is unpredictable. It's hard to stay ahead of the curve sometimes. I can imagine, Marcus said, his eyes glinting with the faintest hint of satisfaction. You know, I've been thinking about that conversation we had a while back. The one where you didn't think my work was worth much. Mr. Andover's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. I may have been mistaken, he said, though his tone was guarded. The market does have a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Marcus smiled, his confidence unwavering. You could say that. There was a brief silence before Marcus continued. I've been fortunate enough to find a network of collectors who truly understand the value of my work. They see what you didn't. And I have to say, the recognition I've received has been far more rewarding than anything I could have imagined. Mr. Andover's face shifted slightly, his pride wounded by the subtle sting in Marcus' words. Well, I suppose there's always room for new talent in the art world. I wish you all the best with your future endeavors. Marcus could sense the sincerity behind the words, but there was also something else, a hint of begrudging respect. The same man who had once brushed him off now saw him for what he had always been, a force of talent, a creator whose art couldn't be ignored. Before he left, Marcus paused and looked Mr. Andover in the eyes. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Andover. I hope your gallery continues to find its way forward. With that, Marcus turned and walked away, the weight of the past lifting off his shoulders. He wasn't here to exact revenge or bask in the glory of proving someone wrong. He was here because his art was valuable, and it had always been valuable, whether Mr. Andover recognized it or not. As he stepped out of the gallery and into the cool night air, Marcus couldn't help but smile. He had proven what he had always known, his art was worth something. Not because of galleries or critics, but because it told a story that needed to be heard.